afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm here to tell you about my 5th mission trip, which was in 2014, and we went to Oil City, Pennsylvania. As you probably expected by now, here's the group t-shirt that we made. You guys have probably seen this t-shirt in a lot of my videos, and that's because I think this is probably my favorite in terms of its design and how well it incorporates the theme of the camp. The theme was Beautiful Mess, and they actually spelled mess in the paint because Catholic Heart has painting projects, and I thought that was just so cool. And on the back we have a cross that has the names of everyone in our group. Thankfully the last name is abbreviated so that no one feels like their privacy is being invaded. So there's me right there, and there's my buddy Jason. Of course, Mike, our lovely rule-abiding chaperone, suggested that the original design would be a V-neck t-shirt where the visible part of the chest would be made out of chest hair, because chest hair is a beautiful mess. Of course that got vetoed, but our group leader still allowed the design to go through for people that wanted it. So of course that's what Mike ended up wearing on days when we weren't all wearing our group t-shirt. So one of the things that struck me the most when we got to the camp was how cool it was. Now I don't mean cool as in Trad and Randy, awesome dude. I mean it was a much cooler temperature than the other camps that we had went on. Maybe it was because we were in the Midwest, in Pennsylvania, so we're closer to the north, so therefore it's a lot colder than, say, when we went all the way down to the south. But man, it felt like spring weather most of the time. It had its moments where it felt like hot-ish, but for the most part in the morning some of the girls were actually wearing jackets and jeans. And so in previous camps I always felt like I was the odd one out because I'd be one of the only people wearing pants, because I wear pants all the time except when I'm swimming. I actually don't even own a pair of shorts except for my swim shorts. And I made a bet with my buddy Ann saying, I bet that there will only be one girl wearing pants, mark my words. And I was dead wrong. In fact, the majority of them were actually wearing pants. And so it was really nice to have a camp that was more to my liking than to the blazing hot summer. Also, the camp was very sloped and it had a lot of trees, so it was scenically very beautiful. I think this was probably my favorite camp as far as how wonderful it looked. And there was also this gigantic hill that the program area where we would see the things on the stage by. And so I, of course, have been hiking most of my life, so I know a thing or two about keeping my balance on hills, and I also used to walk every day at that time, so I would just sprint up the hill and be like, I got this. But for the people that had bad knees or didn't want to make the hike, there was also a trail that led up to it, so people could just use that. It was a bit slower, but it got the job done. Our sleeping quarters were with every single guy in the gym, like they were in 2011. There was just one tiny itsy-bitsy problem this time around, and that was that there was a giant curtain separating the two sides of the gym, and on the other side of the curtain was just this empty area that led to a door leading to the showers that the teenage girls had to use, which was really unfortunate because sometimes the curtains wouldn't be shut all the way, and so some of the guys were in their boxers or they had taken off their shirts. And I get it, a lot of high school girls are used to that, but not all of them are used to that. So I thought that that might have been a little bit insensitive on some of the guys' parts. So to avoid making that mistake myself, whenever I had to change my clothes, I would just do it inside my sleeping bag, or I'd go to one of the bathrooms. I was also really impressed by how, because it was in a gym, obviously it was a lot more wide open, so it was harder to overhear each other. And so after the lights went out, Jason and I would be in conversations in whispers, but those conversations ended up basically making the camp for me, because I was getting much, much, much deeper into my depression. I was practically at the peak, because the following year was essentially what got me to realize I was in depression. And I just said, man, Jason, I really don't feel like I'm doing a whole lot this camp. Like, I feel like I'm kind of just there. And Jason responded, Paul, maybe your job at this camp is just to plant seeds and let God do the watering. So I think that was his way of saying, like, hey, Paul, it's totally okay if you just lead by example and then let God do the rest. So then going on to our work team, I actually really liked my work team this year. I don't think it matches the grand heights of the one in 2011, but this one was a pretty nice motley crew. In fact, I would say that our crew was so fortunate that we actually had a miracle happen to us at the end. So what we did was we went to this very, very, very hilly street where we were helping out a lady who had 3 children, and she still lived with her parents, and we were asked to help them basically remake their backyard, but also to help them build the porch and to build a back porch as well. This was such a fun project because I actually had edged a garden path on my first mission trip, so I was able to teach some of the teenagers, like, here are some tips for how to properly edge the garden pathway. But what was really unfortunate was that I don't really know a thing about carpentry. Thankfully, there was another adult on the team who was much older than me, and he was able to take care of the harder stuff. But one really cool thing about him was that he was such a character. He was very superstitious, so whenever there was a ladder around, he'd be like, don't you guys walk under that ladder because that'll bring you bad luck. And he had a pencil that he called Kitty because it had a Hello Kitty sticker on it. So whenever he'd say, where's my pencil, Paul? I'd say, here it is. He'd be like, why, hello, Kitty. And so when I wrote my Facebook note about that trip, he ended up getting an entire section because of how legendary he was. He also had long hair, just like me. And he said, I'm either going to grow it out or it's going to fall out, because he was a military man, and so he had to cut his hair really short most of his life. So then after he retired from the military, he's just like, I'm just going to grow my hair out. And so it was really neat to have a fellow hippie besides me on the team. So then he showed me how to saw the boards for the back porch, and after showing me only once, I figured out how to do it for the rest of the boards. And I think out of the 10 pieces of wood that we ended up using for that porch, I sawed 8 of them. My buddy Justin came along. He's like, oh, cool, you want to show me how to do it, Paul? So then I showed him how to do it. But then Justin was like, this is boring. I'm just going to go back to painting. So we essentially had 2 groups in one. We had about 3 of the group members were in the house painting one of the rooms, and then we had me, Mike, not the same Mike as the one in my group, and Logan were all, edging the path, and we were scraping out the concrete from the gutters, and occasionally one of the girls would come and join us, but the outdoor area was more or less the man's work unintentionally. Our residents were really, really nice to us. In fact, the residents' parents would sometimes invite us inside the house and just want to have a casual conversation with us. And they were so glad that we were working for them that they actually made our lunch every single day. So that ended up essentially replacing the usual Uncrustables and Gatorades that Catholic Heart would give us, because she had huge jugs of Gatorade in her refrigerator. And we would actually eat inside her kitchen on fancy chairs. And we were just like, dang, this is some amazing hospitality. And we had good quality food. Like, not to say Catholic Heart starved us, but they would give us very campy food, like a bag of chips, Uncrustables, a ham sandwich. It would be very basic stuff. But we had like baked beans and spaghetti and lasagna, and it was just an absolute feast. So Mike, who was our team reporter that year, who was supposed to go on the stage and report like how we saw God that week, he was like, hands down, it's got to be the hospitality at this place. And all of us were just like, we didn't even have to discuss this. It was like a unanimous vote. Now, one quick aside before I get to the funny part is that I never ended up having a good chair for that meal, because I was like, no, teenagers first. You guys sit down. I'll just get whatever chair we had. So a lot of times I would either sit in the high chair or I'd be kneeling on the table. So it often felt like I was much taller or much shorter than the people around the table. Jeff would often choose to eat his lunch later because he was the expert carpenter of the group, and so he'd be like, you guys eat first, I'll eat later, let me just go ahead and keep working on the front porch. So eventually, as the week dawned on, one of our projects was that we were supposed to build concrete steps leading from the back porch into the backyard. The problem is that Catholic Heart didn't give us any concrete, even after we filled a report mentioning that that's what we needed. So finally, Jeff was just like, all right, guys, it looks like we're just going to have to report that this is an incomplete project to Catholic Heart. So let's clean up our stuff and get ready to head back on the bus. So we got our stuff all set to go, and then we sat on the porch. As we were waiting for the bus to pick up, we noticed that a concrete truck stopped exactly across from where our resident's house was and was fixing a hole in the street. So then Jeff and Logan looked at each other and they said, you know, concrete trucks always leave leftover concrete. So Jeff ran across the street to go and get the leftover concrete, and not only did he get the concrete he needed, but it turned out that the guy that was giving him the concrete was one of his graduating classmates from high school, and there were, I think, only 24 of them altogether, which from what I heard was a pretty small group. So Jeff was like, change of plans, guys, we have enough time to finish our project. And we did, and we were so happy that we finished it that we even wrote in the concrete, epic 2014 CHWC, which had one of the little girls saying, what does epic mean, Mommy? And so I bet that they will never forget us because we have our slogan etched forever into the concrete. So then, as we were getting ready to go on the bus on the last day, there were two things that really held up our team. The first was that Emmy was the girl that was in charge of saying our closing prayer for the day. But Jeff said, after that concrete, would you permit me to do the honors? So Emmy's like, sure, yeah, go ahead. So Jeff says, Lord, if we had trouble believing in miracles before, we certainly believe it now. But then we had a collective groan amongst ourselves because we're like, we were the reporters on Monday, and we said that it was the food that we saw God in. But now that we had this concrete story happen, that's where we saw God. Darn it, we were picked too soon. So what ended up happening was, I believe it was either Wednesday or Thursday night, and it was time for the staff testimony. So Jeff, despite the fact that he was a middle-aged adult, snuck onto the stage, and he just took the remote, or not the remote, the microphone, after the final teenager was finished with their presentation, and he told the story of the concrete. And he was the only person to get a round of applause, and despite the fact that he was an adult, and this really was meant for the teenagers, his entire speech was filmed, and I still have it on the summary DVD, so I can rewatch it whenever I want. So I'm really glad to hear that Jeff was brave enough to step outside his comfort zone and make that story known to everyone at the camp so that they'd be convinced, like maybe if they didn't believe in miracles, that like now they would definitely believe it. So getting back to the camp itself, one of the coolest people that I met on that trip was a boy named Austin. And he had a broken arm, but he was yet still so positive and energetic that I ended up just saying like, dang, Austin, you are like such a cool person. And he would have everyone sign his cast, and he was just like, he was basically the new Danny, because Danny didn't go there that year. Now, as far as the camp programs, I actually remember a significant amount of them this time, because Beautiful Mess was, well, the theme, Beautiful Mess, made for a lot of memorable one-liners. For starters, we had a really catchy theme song. It was a beautiful mess, everything I'm seeing, beautiful mess, gonna keep me believing your love is infinite. It's a blessing in disguise when you open up your eyes to a beautiful mess. And of course there's more to that, but I don't want to embarrass you guys more with my singing. But we had so many cool things that had to do with that camp. For starters, we had this hilarious priest who would always make sure to point out the obvious and everything. So he would like have all of his deacons at mass, and then he'd point to each person's head, and he'd say, one of them is not like the other. So he would point out the one deacon that wasn't bald, and I think he even said, like, now that person's hair is a beautiful mess. And I don't remember every single thing he said in his homily, but there was one part of it that was recorded in the summary DVD, and he remembered saying, instead of blaming everyone else for our problems, ask yourself, are you part of the solution, or are you part of the problem? And I think that led to me being too hard on myself in recent years, as a lot of you have been quick to point out. There was also a sequence where the staff members were drawing these squiggly lines on these boxes, and we were like, what the heck is going on with these boxes? It all looks like gibberish. But then they rearranged them, and it turned out to be Jesus's face, and they kept that up the entire week so that we could always see Jesus's face on the stage whenever we wanted to. The adult skit was also us performing the Bohemian Rhapsody. And yes, I have it on YouTube, but just in case you guys haven't seen it, I'll make sure to include it at the bottom of this video so you can see it for yourself. But basically, how Catholic Heart works is that they don't really give you a whole lot of preparation for how much you're knowing about the skit ahead of time. They really want you to step outside your comfort zone and be vulnerable. In fact, step outside your comfort zone is basically Catholic Heart's motto. So when I got to the rehearsal, they said, hey, we're going to be performing a song. And I was like, oh dear, I am so uncultured. And they're like, the Bohemian Rhapsody. And I was like, shoot, the only word I know of that song is Galileo. So they ended up saying, like, who wants to say the falsetto? And I was like, me, 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 me. So then I said, well, I can't really do it now, but at the time, I was able to perfectly do the falsetto, and then the staff member said, that's great, Paul, but we're actually going to have you lip-syncing during the performance. So because I had never heard the song before, I was really stuck as to how I was going to practice. And mind you, we only had an hour to do this. So as you can see in the video, there's a couple of rough edges that I had, but basically what ended up happening was one of the adults volunteered to be the conductor, so she would point at whatever group was supposed to like raise their flashlights. And you're going to see it for yourself anyway if you watch through this video, so I won't bother describing it in depth. But let's just say that when it was all over, a lot of the teenagers, especially the girls in my group, came up to me and they said, Paul, your falsetto is so amazing. And I said, that wasn't my falsetto, that was the song. They're like, no, that had to be you, Paul. And I said, no, I was just lip syncing. And they legitimately did not believe me, because they were like, Paul, you can imitate voices, you can totally do this. So that was cool that I got them to be in such a state of disbelief. The problem with that was that we were dancing so hard from the freestyle moment of the song that the dance party was right after that. Of course, then adoration was right after that. So that ended up being a nice way for those of us who were exhausted from dancing on the adult skit and in the dance party, that we were able to just relax and enjoy adoration. Originally, the camp had planned for adoration to be outside because there was this really beautiful pond, and they thought, well, that would be cool if we set up outdoors in adoration, but then it ended up raining. But then the staff member who had to take down all of the tents and stuff in the pouring rain came in later, and she's like, well, these guys are sheltered inside the gym. I wonder what they're up to. And she's like, you could feel the reverence in the air and how every single person in the audience was just like intensely focused on the real presence of Jesus in that moment. Four Corners was a little bit lacking this year. It probably was my least favorite Four Corners out of all of the mission trips, mainly just because it was too short. Now, admittedly, the times that I did have with the teenagers were really profound and amazing. There just wasn't a whole lot of it. In fact, one of the teenagers had to be cut off from what he was asking because they were like, all right, guys, get back into your groups, like really quickly. But I'll never forget one particular girl. I think her name was Sarah. She came up to me and she was bawling. She was like crying so hard that I couldn't even make out what she was saying most of the time. And at the time, I thought it would be inappropriate if I kept asking her to repeat herself, because obviously the fact that she was willing to open up to me instead of any other adult at the camp was, really touching. So I thought to myself, okay, well, what if I do the cop-out answer and just ask the Holy Spirit for guidance? So I said, how about we ask the Holy Spirit to come to us? So we took hands like this, and as we were praying together, I just got the image of Moses in my head, and I just said, you want to know about Moses and the burning bush? So then I started talking about how Moses didn't have the greatest faith in God at first when God chose him. But then God used Moses to work wonders. So I said, in the same way, maybe God is allowing you to do what you thought was impossible. And it turned out, even though I could barely hear her, that was exactly what she needed to hear. So she ended up beaming, and she just said, thank you, Paul, that's exactly what I needed. And I was just left scratching my head saying, where did Moses come from? So I'm guessing that was the Holy Spirit talking through me, and I'm really glad that I got to have that kind of amazing experience. So now that the camp itself is over, let's briefly talk about what happened in our free day, because that was absolutely hilarious. So we went to Waldemere Amusement Park, which was half water park, half regular old amusement park. But one of the most unfortunate things about this camp, or about the amusement park, was that it was a cashless park. So basically you either had to use a debit card to pay for things, or you had to put cash into a kiosk to get what's called a Wally card, which was basically a temporary debit card that was only used for the park. The problem was that the kiosks weren't working, so poor Edward tried to put in a 20 and it just swallowed up his money. At first, Mike was able to get a refund for him by going to one of the nearby attendants and saying, like, hey, one of my group members ended up losing his money. Do you think you could give him a refund? But he couldn't keep doing that. So finally Edward's just like, what the heck am I doing wrong? So Mike said, when in doubt, hit it. So Mike slapped the machine so hard that it actually opened its door. So then Mike just reached in, grabbed the Wally card, said, here, Edward, it is technically yours because you paid for it. So then he just gently shut the machine. It's just like, let's just walk away so no one will notice. So that's become a meme among everyone that knows Mike. It's just like, Mike broke open a machine just to help a teenager not lose all of his money. And then Matt, ever the troublemaker, decided that he would prank our group leader by saying that Lord Waldemere was a real person. So then he essentially made up his own history of the park, and our group leader was totally convinced. There were a lot of other little things that happened at Waldemere that I'd like to show you guys, but for time constraints, I don't really want to keep going on and on. So let's just say that Waldemere was great, but at one point I was just really tired and I was still in my aquaphobic stages, so that led to me kind of just like sleeping against a chair at the water park, because some people like to suntan, and I like to think that was kind of a low point. But at the same time, you know how I said that Jason and another girl, Kat, were the most influential people at the camp? Even if I didn't, I said it in another take. Well, Kat was really cool because I felt as though I didn't really talk to a whole lot of people and really impact their lives on that camp. But she made sure that not only was she in the van on the way home, but when we went back to get pizza, it was actually her birthday. So I said, Kat, I'll pay for your food as your birthday present. And she was really touched by that. And she just said, you know what, Paul, you're a really great friend of mine. And I was just really happy that she didn't think I was, that she didn't think I was stupid or boring or anything like that. And she was just like, you know what, Paul, you're pretty cool. And that was the ultimate takeaway, is that even if the camp itself I didn't impact a whole lot, Kat and Jason were impacted by me, and I was impacted by them. And at the end of the day, that and the fact that we witnessed a concrete miracle and the fact that Moses and the burning bush came to my head out of anything meant that this camp had a lasting impact on me. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned for the Bohemian Rhapsody adult skit. This time I'm actually in it. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and you are a beautiful mess. Bye!